Welcome to today's Academy Live webcast, Environmental Science on the Cloud with Windows Azure. Kenji, you now have the floor.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming along to this webinar. So this is part of our Windows Azure for Research program, which I'll be telling you more about later on. And as part of this program, we actually are looking at different uses of cloud computing in different disciplines. And what we see is that in environmental science, with certainly the challenges that are coming, that cloud computing is really very, very useful and usable for many, many environmental scientists around the world, both in large projects, but also in smaller projects as well. So as part of this Azure for Research program, we do have a couple of Twitter tags. At Azure for Research is our account, or hash Azure Research is on there. Another thing that we've been building up is a community around LinkedIn. So if you are on LinkedIn, then look for Windows Azure for Research, and please do sign up to that, because that's a great place for us to talk to you, let you know what's going on. We're kicking off a bunch of discussions there, and also we've set up a subgroup on there for questions around using Azure for Research. So there is a forum for Windows Azure for sort of technical questions, for sort of deep technical questions, and that's a great place to go at windowsazure.com. But for research questions, so for instance, you know, I have this research project and I'm thinking about using the cloud, and I have data and I have compute, and can I have a bit of help? Has anyone else got any experience with this? Clearly that's more on the research side than just on the pure Azure development side. So that's why we've created the LinkedIn group. So we have a few hundred members on there already. So please do join that group if you can. So I'm in Microsoft Research. Microsoft Research is about 1,000 people worldwide, and we have researchers doing all sorts of different things. And one of those things is environmental science, but we also have researchers in cloud computing, in algorithms, in data, machine learning. We have hundreds of researchers looking at machine learning. So it's really interesting how we, both internally and working with the research community, take some of the technologies we're working on and develop those together. And Windows Azure is a cloud computing platform. We are working closely with the community to do that. And so this webinar is really about how we are doing that. So again, the website is called azureforresearch.com. My email address is on there, so please do email me if you want any more details about this. So we've got a few attendees now, so I'm going to kick off. And I'm really happy actually that as part of this webinar, we're joined by a couple of our very special guests. So Tanya's from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And she is a computer scientist, but moved into using a lot of her expertise in the areas of sort of environmental science and ecology, and she's doing some very exciting things, and looking forward doing many, many things with the cloud and out in the field, and she'll be telling us all about that a little bit later on during the webinar. And then Christian is joining us, and he has a great project called LiveANDES, which is a sort of conservation and biodiversity project, and he'll be talking about that and how he's been developing that and moving that to the cloud to make it much more, you know, scalable there. So we're really excited to have Tanya and Christian. They're actually in the US. I'm here in the Microsoft Research Lab in Cambridge, so we're across a couple of time zones. And it's great to see many of you from other countries. So thanks for joining us. So what's interesting, I think, today in all science and all research, just in the world around us, is the amazing pace of technology. So many new ways of communicating, gathering data, and this immense power for doing computation. Even in a mobile phone or a smartphone, the amount of computation we have there is equivalent to what we had with supercomputers just a few decades ago. So it's absolutely amazing what can be done And the challenge often is how can we apply lots of this great technology in a sensible way to advance our research. There are lots of projects which do technology for technology's sake, and that can push things forwards, but importantly for researchers, applying the technology in a very usable way is important, and that's why one of those technologies I think is cloud computing, and that's kind of what we want to drill down on today during this webinar. So, as I said in Microsoft Research, we actually have an environmental science research group, and they're interested in, again, pushing the state of the art in areas like biodiversity. We've got some work around carbon modeling, species modeling, species distribution modeling, migration, and developing new concepts and methods, again, as part of this bigger piece of Microsoft Research, and more broadly, Microsoft, the global company. And critically, it's joining up theoretical ecology with field ecology, experimental ecology, and using computational techniques in order to help with that. And in a lot of other areas, for instance, in engineering, where we use predictive models to build bridges and aircraft, the group in Microsoft Research is looking at how can we build those types of predictive models for ecosystems and the Earth system. And so it's really nice that within Microsoft Research we have the technology, but we have this set of researchers here in the Cambridge lab who are, really at the forefront of pushing the boundaries of environmental science. So I think it's fair to say that within environmental science we're in this sort of perfect storm. In many areas it's great in terms of the data that we can collect, remote sensing, more and more advanced satellites going up, making that data much more available to everyone. Incredible unmanned air vehicles, so quadcopters, unmanned planes, very cheap sensors, cheap cameras, IR cameras, motion sensors, the ability to build a camera trap for just a few hundreds of dollars. The fact that we have the internet and the World Wide Web, and we can move data around, and we can execute computation at huge scale across the network is great. So those are good things, but the challenge is actually how can we use that to our advantage, because this growth is fairly organic in terms of people everywhere are collecting their own data, creating their own algorithms. We typically publish in the literature and scientific publications, but we often don't detail right down to the nuts and bolts how we're managing all of this pipeline, and that can make reproducibility quite difficult in terms of the science. And also just have to work together, particularly across disciplines or across even sub-disciplines. And that's, I think, one of the challenges that we face as the data becomes more readily available. Do feel free to ask questions online using the IM. So hi to Leonard on there, so from Colombia, so we're getting people from all over the world, which is absolutely fantastic. So particularly in environmental science, I think data is the spice of life. We gather lots of data. Lots of that's manual measurement, field records, whether that's counting or typing, collecting samples. We have automated systems like towers, historical photos over decades, and increasingly with supercomputers, for instance, model output, and also sensors that we can, for instance, put on animals and get GPS tracks and accelerometer tracks. And there's so many different feeds of data, essentially, which again is great, and often those pieces of data are collected individually. And again, one of the challenges, I think, is the integration of that. And if we get that right, we can really improve the value of that data. And so we often think about translating data into information, and then using that information in order to gather scientific insight. And I think increasingly, particularly in environmental science, we will need to take that insight and turn that into decision support tools for policymakers or crisis management as another step just beyond the pure science. And so we do want to move up this ladder, really. And an example, for instance, would be in water management, water security, going from gathering the data, making sure that data is sufficient quality, which I think is an area where we are making a lot of progress, but then actually managing that data, aggregating it, distributing it, making it understandable and usable is a real challenge. Then going one step further and integrating that, performing analysis, and then doing this predictive modeling. So there are some serious challenges, but really, really valuable if we can manage to do this across different subdisciplines, and again, particular areas like, for instance, water management, but also then to be able to integrate across those subdisciplines where there is real benefit to be had. So this idea of collecting data Jim Gray, who was one of our researchers at Microsoft, coined this term, the fourth paradigm, data-intensive scientific discovery. So the first three paradigms you could argue were sort of experimental observational science, then theoretical science with the evolution of mathematics, and then computational science in the context of sort of simulation. And we're now in this world of aggregating data, making use of that data, inferring insight from that data. And when we think about that with data at the center, it's quite interesting in how we can build out systems and services to help scientists, and how we can actually work in different ways in some of these very large, collaborative projects. For instance, the Large Hadron Collider, the New Square Kilometre Array, but clearly in environmental science, for instance, climate science, where climate scientists work closely together in order to get a common view of what the world is doing. So an example of this is actually our Jeff Dozier, who is a hydrologist, and he's been thinking about this in terms of snow hydrology and snow melt, which is very important, for instance, in predicting droughts, and using this idea of taking the data and doing modeling around the data in order to create these sort of predictive models. And so he's really been pushing, one of the people pushing this idea of this fourth paradigm of science and how it can change the way we think about science and how we do science. But when we do this, one of the challenges is around data integration. So we have all this data, but it's in different formats. So it could be raster point vector, different time series with different time intervals. Vocabulary and meaning can be different to different people, even within the same sort of subdiscipline or discipline. So we get into this idea of ontologies and common vocabularies, which gets very complicated very quickly. Also, the sparsity of data, and how we acquire that data is interesting. We were just having a conversation today about looking at the bird species distribution in Australia, and it's very aligned with the road network. Again, the checking to see how your data is observed is very important when you start making inferences around that. So we really need to understand that carefully. And then again, integrating sort of spatial and temporal variation. So all of these challenges around data, we have this huge opportunity with data, but a huge challenge on how we can work with it much more effectively. And so there are some issues with this, and I think one of the interesting opportunities is when we can basically tie together all these different types of data from the individual scientist, the individual observer who could be out on a reserve in Africa with a pair of binoculars, who is tirelessly sitting there recording the instances of zebras or tigers, right through to the largest groups in the world running global climate simulations, generating petabytes of data. How can we get all of these people working together so that they can take advantage of all the work being done around the world? The issue of trust and provenance becomes quite important there, and recording exactly how we've collected the data, how the data's passed around, how it's shared, different concerns around misuse of the data, that if we just push out raw data, that people might misunderstand it and misinterpret that, and that could be potentially quite damaging. And in order to do this, the tools differ greatly from people who have access to the biggest supercomputers in the world through to, for instance, people using cameras, even smartphones out in the field in order to collect data. So we do have to think about this, but if we can get it right and we can manage this and push this into a pipeline, for instance, with modeling, then there are huge gains that can be had. So one of the interesting areas, and I think the time is very ripe for cloud computing in its quite broad sense of this kind of ubiquitous platform for data and compute. which many people experience, for instance, through their smartphones, through their tablet devices, where a lot of the functionality is delivered through the cloud. So I just want to ask in the audience, maybe to see, how many of you use cloud computing, or just here to be sort of curious about it. So you can just click on here in order to answer this poll, just to get a little feel for all of you out there, and sort of what your level of is here, because I'm now going to sort of start talking about cloud computing itself, particularly a little bit around Windows Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud computing platform, to try and give you a bit of insight not just to what it is, but also importantly how it's being used, or how it can be used for environmental science. And so it's interesting. A lot of you here are actually starting to play with cloud computing, which is great. And I think certainly one of the things with Windows Azure we try hard with is to make that really easy to do. So if anybody else wants to jump in and stick your vote in there, then please go ahead. If anyone else has any questions, so we've asked about the presentation slides. So this whole webinar will be made available sort of afterwards, and so certainly we'll make these slides there for you as well, so you can drill down. And certainly in my slide deck there are a few hyperlinks in there that you can follow, so that you can follow up from this webinar. So it looks like a lot of you actually are aware of cloud computing and are starting to use it, which is fantastic. So I just want to now spend a little bit of time hopefully talking about cloud computing. And so there are lots of definitions of cloud computing, and so we could say that cloud computing is essentially, again, this ubiquitous resource that sits somewhere on the network where I can get compute and data. And fundamentally what it means is I can get that compute, that data, different services, whatever I want, and I can get that whenever I need it. And that's, I think, a key feature of cloud computing, where other technologies and platforms, so like supercomputers, for instance, certainly are fantastic, but you can't always get access to those when you absolutely need it, because you might not have actually be entitled to use it, or you might have to wait in a queue in order to use it. So if you have a deadline, for instance, you might not meet your deadline because you're stuck in a queue to use it. And cloud computing in many ways solves a lot of those problems because it's available absolutely when you need it. And so cloud computing comes in different flavors, and if you look up anything around cloud computing, you'll see these acronyms that come up. And so basically sort of three flavors. One of them, maybe I'll start on the right-hand side. So software as a service is really what you see as an end user. So again, email, photo sharing, things like SkyDrive, Office 365, those are software as a service. So you see those essentially as something that you use from your device. Platform as a service is what's used to deliver that software. So that could be a database, for instance. So SQL Azure allows you to scale out a database on the cloud. And it's that sort of high level. So you worry about the application and the data, but you don't worry about everything underneath that. What you can do is, if you go to that lower level, we call that infrastructure as a service, where you're dealing with a virtual computer, a virtual machine, and you do have to manage everything from the operating system up from the operating system. So for instance, you might have to apply patches to the operating system, whereas with platform as a service, you don't have to worry about that because the cloud computing provider does that for you. So it allows you to focus a bit more on what you're really trying to achieve. And so on Windows Azure, we have these sort of three particular characters. There's the virtual machines, we have these cloud services, these high-level services, and then just websites. So standard websites as well as standard websites like WordPress, but also CMSs like Drupal, for instance. So Windows Azure itself is lots and lots of different things, but from a very high level, it's basically this huge computing platform that's global, that's got millions of servers, and you can run any application on there, you can use any language, so not just Microsoft.NET languages like C# and F#, but critically things like Python, which is obviously very popular within scientific domains, Java, PHP, Node.js. One of the new features we've added is the ability to run Linux. So we really want people to be taking advantage of Windows Azure using their Linux virtual machines, because we know a lot of people have those sort of pre-packaged pieces of software that they can just put up onto Windows Azure as Linux VMs. and other technologies like big data analysis like Hadoop and HD Insight, for instance. So one of the things about Azure is, again, it's very flexible and open. So if we look at the bottom left there, actually all of our SDKs are available on GitHub. And at the top there you can see our developer portal, which is supports, again, all these different languages. In the bottom right you can see the virtual machines and a whole different variety of different Linux flavors and things like Oracle, as well as of course of Windows Server and SQL Server and all the sort of Microsoft products on there as well. And we have a nice depot called the VM depot where you can take a virtual machine. So we've built one here called the Azure Data Science Core, which has got Python, it's got scikit-learn for machine learning, it's got things like Matplotlib, Pandas for data integration, and it's even got things like Storm and Kafka, which are big data technologies used by companies like LinkedIn and Twitter for managing all of the message queuing. We've packaged all that up into a Linux VM, put that on VM Depot, so anybody around the world can go into the Windows Azure portal and deploy this virtual machine just a few mouse clicks. It's a great way of making your research software available to the global community, and so we're very excited about VM Depot, and we have one called Via Linux and CCAN, which is a data management system. And then on Azure we have compute, so you can run on lots of CPUs, but also it's very important for being able to manage your data. So we have different types of storage on Azure. We have what are called blobs, so this is akin to sort of file storage, and then we have drives, which is what we use, for instance, within our virtual machines. We have this interesting store called Table, which is structured storage, but it's not a relational database. We also do have SQL Azure, which is a full-blown relational database. But tables scale massively across the cloud on thousands of nodes. So if you don't need that true relational capability, tables are a great way to manage lots and lots of data. And then queues allow us to actually manage messages in a very reliable and secure way. So again, this combination of features means that we can put together different cloud services in a very nice way. So a use case here would be a hybrid cloud where I might have lots of data, say climate data, in a local data center. I want to run lots of processing, so I could take a copy of my working set that I'm interested in, push that up into Windows Azure, spin up, say, 20 or 30 virtual machines, use those to run my processing, and when it's done, download onto my machine, and then I can turn off all of those machines in Windows Azure. And on Windows Azure, you only pay per minute. So it really can be quite cost effective to be able to just spin up 100 machines for, say, half an hour and then spin them down again. And it costs a few cents per hour, and so if you have that type of burst processing where you just want to do a bunch of processing and then finish with that and you want to do some analysis, it's a really good scenario for cloud computing. So I quickly want to run through a few different scenarios before I hand over to Tanya and Christian. So around data, we have this interesting tool called FetchClimate, and this is hosted in Azure. It's got tens of terabytes of data on the back end, different types of environmental data, and it's an intelligent service. So you put in queries, and it just returns. For instance, here you can see air temperature across the world and soil moisture across the world. And you just point and click, you draw a box, you say, show me all the air temperature between, 1960, 1969, and it goes away, finds the data set, or multiple data sets, picks the one with the lowest uncertainty, and then returns it, and you can download that as a file. So again, it's a service which hides much of the complexity around environmental data behind a very nice web front end, but not just a web front end, but also a set of APIs so that you can use this from R, C# and other tools as well. There are these ideas of data marketplaces as well, and Azure Data Marketplace is a place where, for instance, you can get the weather forecast data for the UK. So if you do a web search on open weather data Azure, you can get these 5-day forecasts for the UK. And when you make your data available on the cloud, you can see here the requests. You might expect all the requests for this to come from the UK, but actually as many come from the US and worldwide. So making that your local data available is very, very good. And so here are just a couple of examples in the UK. The Environment Agency publishes its flood warning data through Facebook, all streamed out from Windows Azure, and again it gives them that scale. We had some floods here in the UK recently, and obviously the website and the flood warning system, everybody looks at that, so the cloud allows you to scale that out. Another example here is the UK Crown Estate, where they're publishing terabytes of data for the water, the marine area around the UK coastline, to make that available, for instance, for people doing planning for wind farms and other development around the coast. So just want to talk a little bit about modeling. So one of the systems we built, one of my colleagues, Wenmin Ye, has built this point-and-click weather forecasting service. So basically we've taken the NCAR weather forecasting code, moved that onto Windows Azure, so you can literally point and click on a map and generate a forecast. And so we've run, over 1,500 simulations in a year, with cities, and it takes a few hours to run. But it's basically, again, hiding the complexity of this typical sort of high-performance computing, complex task of running a weather forecast. We're making that really, really simple through the cloud. And this just shows, you go to weatherservice.cloudup.net, you can go into the gallery and see different weather forecasts, and you can see things like precipitation and temperature contour plots, over time over those days, and you can see where all the forecasts have been made. So it's a really nice example where we've wrapped this quite complex pipeline of pulling in data, pulling in the observational data, and then creating a parallel job which runs, this high-resolution weather forecast, and then does the post-processing out into Bing Maps. And so we've, again, hidden this complexity behind using the cloud, and it gives us that scalability. And this just shows the management portal for Windows Azure. And it's got, we can run on hundreds of cores, and you can see it ramping up. And when we ramp up, one of the nice things that you can do is you can elastically, you can scale the available number of cores here. So you can see 12 instances where each one of these VMs is actually 16 cores, and we can expand that out. And as the system loads up, you can get Azure to spin up more virtual machines to make sure it can manage the load. So again, it's one of the really nice features of using a sort of cloud service. And again, with Matlab, we can use this, what we call the HPC Cluster Manager, and this just shows the front end of that. If you look at the link here under our, this is actually azureforresearch.com technical papers page. There's a whole documentation on how to do this. But if you look at where we have parametric sweep job, we get a nice little window up here. We can put in the details of our executable and the different parameters we want to sweep over. We click submit. It pushes that up into Azure, and then when it runs the jobs, it pushes, here you can see actually these different Matlab results files come through, and this is showing us what's on the Azure storage, and then we can run just a little PowerShell to actually look at the, in this case, a banana minimization calculation. So again, makes it very easy, again, hiding that complexity for doing scaled out Matlab on Windows Azure, and again, the technical report goes into a bit more detail on that, so do have a look at that. And just finally, I want to talk about Distribution Modeler, which is, again, one of the projects here in Cambridge, where we're building this modeling pipeline, which uses FetchClimate to pull in data, and then we can write models, and it records the provenance of those models, and then we can share those models on SkyDrive, and we're moving this to run in Azure. Here you can see actually a fire prediction. We're doing things like wheat prediction models, and again, we're really excited about being able to use the cloud in this very sort of scaled out way, so people can do much better collaborative science. So that hopefully shows a bit of background on where we think environmental science is, what Windows Azure is, how Windows Azure can be used very effectively for different scenarios in environmental science. And again, our Windows Azure for Research program, azureforresearch.com, is where you'll find all this information. We actually have these research awards every couple of months. We will give out about 12 months worth of Windows Azure resources of compute and data, so you can do a pretty good pilot project at scale, so you can experiment. And so do have a look at those. We've already funded quite a few in the environmental science domain, in urban computing. We are running training programs globally as well. We've run some in China, in Korea, in France, in Switzerland, in South Africa. We're going around the world to have a look, find out which course is nearest you. It's no cost to you to attend the course, and you'll get a 6-month Azure Pass if you attend the course. So do have a look and do come along to one of those training courses. So we have this webinar series, and there are other webinars, and these are being made available online on demand afterwards on Microsoft Research and also on YouTube. And then the technical papers. So there are, I think, half a dozen technical papers, but we've got more in the pipeline. So do have a look, because those are real deep dives into many of the things. There's a great one around using Python with Windows Azure, for instance, and storage and scale out. And we are coming to conferences. We were just at the AGU conference in San Francisco recently, and really want to talk to you and work with the community around what can be done with Windows Azure. So this program, it's really what this program is aimed at. So that's really what I wanted to say around cloud and environmental science to set the context and hopefully give you some information on that. But I'm really excited to be able to hand over to some of our friends, Tanya and Christian. So I'd like to hand over to Tanya. I think we need to switch. So I guess, Stephanie, if you could switch slide decks, then over to Tanya, and she's going to talk for a little while about some of the great work that she's doing.
Hi, everybody. It's Tanya Berger-Wolf from University of Illinois at Chicago. I work in computational ecology, so I'm a computer scientist who works with ecologists to go from data, this is data intensive, to insight, to scientific insight, and we also go out further to education, outreach, and to museums and zoos. And I'll talk a little bit about it, how all of this can be done on the web. So we look at the whole pipeline as the ecological information system. So this is from data to visualization and outreach. Every part of it is really has to be done on the cloud, because every part of it is a huge collaboration across 3 or more continents and many people, and with big computational resources. So I'll give you a little bit of a taste of what is it that we're actually doing and how that is done on the cloud with the resources available from Windows Azure in this case. So what my area of ecology, particularly, I work with biologists who are interested in social species and the social behavior of animals. So the typical data collection until very recently, the typical data collection process is a scientist, in this case, watching gelada baboons in Ethiopia or somewhere else around the world, writing things on paper, these days moving a little bit more to tablet, so they've in a very distributed, asynchronous way collecting information about one particular population of one particular species. If we want to have this information sort of aggregated over time, over different views of the same population, even with paper or tablet, we need to be able to store that data in an asynchronous distributed way where there's also access control, because there are many people who are working on this data. Some of them are scientists, some of them are field assistants, some of them may be citizen scientists. So different people have different access to the data, different permissions to do things with the data. Anywhere from just dumping unstructured information to cleaning data, looking for outliers, looking for actual information, which would be scientists. So today we're moving to sensor-based collection of the same data. So we're putting sensors, GPS collars, proximity sensors, other radio collars on animals. So in this case, we're working with zebras, baboons in Kenya. There's a little picture of a Mataki device developed by Microsoft in collaboration with scientists in collaboration with Microsoft Research within project in Cambridge with the project Technology for Nature. But so all of this information, there's up on top there is a picture of a current project we have with baboons in Kenya, where we put GPS collars tracking an entire troop over 30 days at 1 second resolution, 30 baboons. So this is highly distributed and now massive data. So it's the same kind of as the observation on paper by a scientist, because it's done by many people with different permissions and in a distributed way. But now it's also massive. Each baboon in this study has 20 million data points associated with it. It's also typically the problem with this kind of data collection is that it's done in areas like Kenya, like Ethiopia, in remote areas, typically uninstrumented environments. So you can't really have high bandwidth data push real time. So we have to build different cloud solutions that take this data in an asynchronous way but yet make it available on demand. And so we're building solutions now of extracting features directly from data, where the data storage can be sort of raw data massively on a big server, but the pushback is at a feature level which is useful for particular query, and that has to be done very carefully. So other modes of data collection that are coming today are images, huge number of images coming from camera traps. These are students in a course that we teach where we bring computer scientists and ecology students to Kenya for a 3-week interdisciplinary course where they do field work and design computational solutions, interdisciplinary solutions to ecological problems. Or tourists coming to safaris, and field scientists and field assistants taking hundreds of thousands of images of particularly charismatic animals like zebras, giraffes, lions, and cheetahs. But also we find today millions of pictures from accidental citizen scientists seeing birds and butterflies and insects, other insects, and even deer in their backyard, or squirrels. So all of this allows us, if we process it and extract the information about individual animals, we can get information about species and populations at a global level. That means we actually have to process all of that information from the distributed in some way, put it together, and be able to then use modern image processing tools, some of which we have developed to identify any spotted or striped animal individual. This is HotSpotter in collaboration with my colleagues from Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute. So using these tools, we can actually now create global views or even entire big area views of populations, where we're building combining images from all various sources into one population view. And we're scaling this up today to use drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, or other with video attached to this airplanes, or stationary videos, which you see in the bottom, to track ants in this case in the wild. So again, in this particular case, the data accumulates very quickly and has to be uploaded and processed very quickly on the cloud, but also some of the processing has to be done locally. Some of it has to be done globally. So the system in this case is a hybrid system that we built. So all of these data sources, and another big source of data today is citizen science. So citizen science is used in our studies at 3 points: data collection, something like Instant Wild, for example, on the top right, which is another Microsoft research project, or iNaturalist.org, or WildMe, or many other image data collection sources like tourists on safari. So this is data collection. Data processing, where citizen scientists help computer vision algorithms, for example, to create training data and to improve the accuracy of species detection and individual detection animal in the images. And that's something like Snapshot Serengeti platform that can be leveraged. And we're building our own based on WildMe project. So, and finally, citizen scientists are, of course, people who are engaged in science, engaged in conservation, engaged in the goal of increasing biodiversity and maintaining biodiversity in the world. So their action, they can be called to action through this engagement in the actual process of making science. So, however, the issues of data access and representation becomes a big issue when we want to display data in different views to different parts of the citizen scientist, and then also have to manage access control. So all of these data come together into one view, and as I mentioned, different sources, different highly distributed, asynchronous, with access control, hybrid real-time, and sort of backhand heavy computation. And they come together in various forms. Kenji talked a little bit about unstructured to sort of NoSQL tables to full-fledged SQL relational databases. And in fact, on Azure, you can add your own database platform if you need databases for network. We use a lot of social network analysis, so for network analysis, there are specialized databases that can handle and support those queries, or if you want to connect to GIS systems, so there you can do that through relational databases and APIs directly, or to use Azure API directly from Azure. So once we have data, a lot of analysis happens, and my main the focus on my research is to develop these analysis tools to extract information about location and semantics of location, of animal movement, of social interactions and proximity networks over time, and the analysis for dynamic social networks that arise from that, everything from identifying timescale, predicting topology of these networks, identifying persistent communities over time. All of these tools we've developed in my lab, and they're developed collaboratively. They're computation intensive, so the main point of cloud services here is cloud as a service. So we use Hadoop, we use high-performance computing heavily, and develop some of the methodology, algorithmic methodology behind it. And so once, and this is a iterative loop. We develop tools, we discuss it, all of it collaboratively, typically across 3 continents and 5 different time zones. Back to computation, again, results of the computation, everybody has to see them at the same time, discussion, back to computation and tool development. Once all of that is done, we can now produce deliverables such as models and computational tools. We can visualize results, and we can work with our outreach projects to create education and outreach deliverables. And so I'll show you just a taste of those. For visualization, we're talking some of the unique visualization projects that we have in the process right now is in collaboration with Electronic Visualization Lab at UIC, and that's the home of Cave 2, virtual reality, immersive virtual reality platform with this fully surrounding 3D collaborative space. So this is 32 simultaneous servers giving for example, landscape information and simulated as well as overlaid real animal population movement and interaction data where we can create augmented virtual reality and give the scientists the space where they can leverage the intuition of field observations, but on-simulated and processed and then analyzed data and close this loop very, very quickly. So again, this is massively computation intensive. It's combination, it's unique platform. We're working closely with the Worldwide Telescope team at Microsoft Research, and a lot of the data, it's hybrid cloud services served both locally and from the cloud, and creating this unique virtual reality field biology lab, essentially. For the outreach activities and educational activities, we are working with the Chicago Public Schools and the suburban schools to create this urban safari and animal stories project, where it's going to become part of the science curriculum, hopefully, at schools based on a lot of the ideas from the project. And so the data that they see in these projects when they go to compare what they see in their backyard through camera traps that are deployed to compare it to what they would see in a safari or in nature preserve in Kenya. Those data are from the cloud, with pre-computed analysis pushed directly to the classroom. And similar project we have with the Brookfield, in collaboration with Brookfield Zoo. Again, when you see an animal such as a zebra at the zoo and compare it to its wild behavior in Kenya, so there is a combination of real-time and stored push data through the cloud, where we're also in the future hoping that all visitors to the zoo will be able to download a mobile app as they enter, that they can sort of ask questions and interactively about the data of wild populations of the same species. So that's a brief tour of computational ecology on the cloud and my own social network. If you're a collaboration network, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Tanya, for that. It was fantastic to see how you're using the cloud but integrating it with all the other great sort of ways of going out into the field and doing the analysis. So that's great. So I'd like to hand over to Christian now, if we can switch slide decks, who's going to tell us a little bit about the LiveANDES project. So over to you, Christian.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be part of this conference. Let me talk to you about the advanced network for the distribution of endangered species. This is a research project that we started as wildlife ecologists working in a partnership with computer engineers from our university, Catholic University in Santiago of Chile. Basically, what we were looking at is how we could approach the data in the field in a way that can be shared and sustained for future analysis, regardless the source of the data that you have in a given expedition or in a given scientific work or even a casual encounter by a citizen scientist. Basically, what we want to put together is the opportunity of citizen scientists plus wildlife park rangers or even students that are going into the wild, and sometimes they find animals or they find interesting things to report, and they don't have any way to report it. Perhaps an email or perhaps saying something to the park ranger, but that information is not shared, it's not available for future analysis, and it's not used by any agency or scientific community. So if we close the loop between the species in the wild being encountered casually or by chance by people with citizen science decision makers and the scientific community, we can start putting together an interesting pattern behind single observations. So LiveANDES is a platform that firstly was developed in Chile by us for our country only a few years ago, where you can share information, you can upload into your account your sightings, but you can also see and look into the other people's sightings that are organized by time, by location, and by the list of species, terrestrial species that we have in Chile. You can also enjoy a multimedia web-based encyclopedia of all the main species using Bing maps and using search engines that are connected into this LiveANDES platform. But the challenge was how could scale up into something global. So that's why we started to think about using Windows Azure. Actually, our structure or the software structure is very simple. When you have a sighting, you can upload that using mobile devices like mobile phones, and then immediately that information, the location, the date, and the species, and any other note that you have will be shared and available for everybody. But then also you would like to see what's going on with wildlife around you or in a given place, and then the tools for visualization are really important. So that's where Silverlight entered, Bing Maps technology were used, and in the sense of also for a database, you can go backwards, you look for data from previous years, and you could do some predictions forward in a simple way by having an understanding of what's going on in the long run with the species that you are looking at. So we need to move forward in terms of going beyond Chile, and that's why we started to plan a new architecture and new structure, which is using Windows Azure. So we need to move forward to work offline in remote areas, in national parks or in the Andean region or the Amazon, And we need to allow people to upload and download or visualize information very quickly. So from that point of view, a single server in a given place wasn't really a good option. That's why we started to explore the next step to going into the cloud. So in that sense, we have been using several Microsoft technologies to enter the sites, to protect for security and the accounts, and to do some polygons or using visual and spatial information in a very simple way. So the big step was now, for the last 3 to 4 months, we have been uploading a new version of LiveANDES, which is called LiveANDES 2.0, into Windows Azure to really use the best of the cloud power, and then to be able to integrate our software for different countries in the Americas as a first step. So the idea is that we can use the current technology like Bing Mac, SQL, Azure together, and also in a way that you could easily find, search, or quest for given data in different places, regardless where you are in the world. Why is this important? Because when you have the opportunity to use the cloud, you have more options to have a very fast search, or use multiple resources like images, sound, video, and also geolocations. So the wireless data, for example, we were testing this software by using wireless data from previous 10 years environmental impact assessments in our country, and then we were looking for searching the database to find out how important and how useful were all the environmental impact assessments that we collected and uploaded into the database to do some predictions in the future. And then we realized that staying in a server or in a single server won't be possible if this thing goes global. So that's why we started to think about using Azure Architecture and using the services that Azure provides to us as we develop the new version of this LiveANDES. So the idea is that people can use computers, but also can use multiple devices, mobile devices like mobile phones, different operating systems, to input information into our software. So that's why the REST API worker role is so important, and then how we keep the information and how we store information and process the information is more up to Azure to solve all these issues than us in a given server. So another important thing about Azure is that allows us to have fast requests and have fast functioning of this LiveANDES regardless where you are, because of the global coverage of Azure around the world, and also allow us to integrate complicated search or multiple search at one time or at the same time, only with one click, and allows us not to be worried about the different platforms, the different search engines, or the different mapping systems that people are using, because the interoperability of Azure for LiveANDES. So those things make us to think that it was a good idea to do this next step. So how we foresee the future? Here you can see a mountain lion in the north of Chile in the Andes. Our aim is that at the end of the day, people can use LiveANDES to get closer to nature, to understand patterns of wild animals in the wild, to share information, to provide a platform to different environmental agencies, agriculture agencies that need to know more about the distribution of the species and about the current situation of the species in a given place. So looking into so many requests that we have from IUCN or the Biodiversity Convention, that we have to list and classify and understand the current situation of our wildlife in every single country. Actually, the role of citizen scientists and the role of previous information stored in a very accessible and simple way is crucial to understand how it's going to be the fate of wildlife in the near future. That is all what I wanted to tell you now, and I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was absolutely fantastic to hear about LiveANDES, which again has been a very successful project, and how you're planning to move that to Azure to make it even better and more scalable and usable by all of the users. So thank you for that. So just switching back to my original slide deck, just really want to wrap up looking at actually one project that we've been doing is with Young-Rail Ryu at Seoul National University, who's been using NASA MODIS data, which was quite difficult. Here you can see him in his office with his computer, and he was very constrained with his computer, and so the MODIS data is available, made available from NASA, this great satellite imagery data set. But it's quite large, and in order to process it you need quite a lot of computing power. So we worked with a number of researchers at University of Virginia, Berkeley, Stanford, and with some of our folks in Microsoft Research to build out this platform called MODIS Azure, which takes in the NASA data and then does lots of reprojection and calculation in order to produce actually evapotranspiration data, and that's then was pushed out so that scientists can download that, which again still meant there was a visualization problem. So what we've done most recently in the last few months is to push the data into FetchClimate. So the entire pipeline is in the cloud, so none of it actually touches Young-Rail's desktop machine until he's ready right at the end of the analysis and might want to pull down the data from FetchClimate. So it's a really interesting example of this sort of big data in terms of just extending what Young-Rail is able to do on his desktop, but making best use of the cloud with these great available data sets, but doing some pretty heavyweight processing and visualization in the cloud. So the opportunity really is to take where we are, we talk about climbing the ladder, going from data to information to insight and ultimately to decisions and policy, is moving from this world today where researchers are often constrained by their laptops, HPC systems and clusters are, fantastic machines, but used by relatively smaller numbers of scientists, and that many researchers are unable to use those resources, not because they're not available necessarily, but obviously skills able to use those. To move to a world where really we have a unified community where those supercomputer users and cluster users are able to more readily distribute and disseminate their data so that other scientists and researchers can make use of it. And then once that data is available, the ability to run analysis against it using the cloud, and to marshal resources, so not caring or knowing how some computation gets done, because as a scientist you just want to get on with the science. And that's the sort of world that we're trying to move to and hoping to move to, and that's what our Azure for Research program is really aimed at. So do have a look at azureforresearch.com and join the LinkedIn group to keep track of things. And please do look at applying for an award, coming to some of our training, taking advantage of all of the things that we're making available. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for coming, and do keep in touch, like I said, through the LinkedIn group. These webinars will be are available online, so do share these with your colleagues. So I just want to thank you all for coming to the webinar today. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kenji. I have enabled our survey for this webcast. We hope you found today's information helpful. If you enjoyed today's webcast or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, please let us know by completing this survey. The scores are on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest possible score. This concludes today's Academy Live session. As a reminder, you'll be able to access a replay of this webcast via a link that will be distributed via email post-session. like to extend another big thank you to our presenters, Kenji, Tanya, and Christian, and we'd like to thank you for joining our Academy webcast. You may now disconnect from this call.